June 1968. A grain elevator parking lot in Lamar, Iowa. 92 degrees. Humidity thick enough to choke on. Dale Verrer had just mentioned his summer plan to 3 neighboring farmers, and they erupted in laughter. Ed Thompson actually slapped his knee. A shed? For a tractor? He was leaning against his brand-new Ford F-250, arms crossed, grinning like he'd just heard the joke of the century. "What's next, Dale? Little rubber boots for when it rains?" The other 2 farmers, Jim Carson and Bob Mitchell, joined in. They were all waiting their turn at the scale, trying to find shade, and Dale's announcement had just become their entertainment. Bob wiped sweat from his forehead with a red handkerchief. "You're seriously going to waste money building a shed for a tractor? Just park it by the barn like everyone else, like everyone's always done." Dale Verrer was 39 years old, quiet, didn't argue much. But he had just bought a used 1963 Farmall 806 tractor for $4,200 cash, and he had a plan for it. A plan that would either make him look foolish or save his entire future. "I'm building the shed," Dale said simply. 30 by 40 feet. Concrete floor, metal roof. Going to keep my equipment protected from weather, from sun damage, from rust. Ed shook his head, still grinning. "Dale, that's $3,000 to $4,000 you're talking about. For what? So your tractor doesn't get wet? That's foolish. Use that money for something productive. Buy more land, something that makes you money." Dale's response was calm. "The shed will make me money. Equipment kept inside lasts twice as long, maybe 3 times. I'll save thousands in replacement costs." Jim Carson snorted. "My dad farmed for 43 years. Never had an equipment shed. Never needed one. That's how it's always been done." "Your dad replaced his tractor every 8 to 10 years," Dale pointed out. "Bought new, sold the old one, cycled through equipment constantly." "Yeah, because equipment wears out," Jim said, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "That's farming. You use equipment hard, it wears out, you replace it. You can't make a tractor last 30 years, Dale. That's not realistic." Dale looked at the 3 of them, at their confident smirks, at the certainty in their eyes that they were right and he was foolish. He didn't argue further. "We'll see," Dale said. Then he got in his truck and drove home. "Have fun wasting your money, Dale," Ed called after him. More laughter followed Dale out of the parking lot. But here's what they didn't know. Here's the twist nobody saw coming. That night, Dale sat at his kitchen table with his wife Sarah, going over the shed plans. Sarah understood her husband's careful, methodical approach to everything. "They laughed at you," she said. "It wasn't a question." "They did. Does that bother you?" Dale thought about it. "Not really. If I'm right, I'll save thousands. If I'm wrong, I'll have a nice building." Over the next 8 weeks, Dale built his machine shed. He did most of the work himself. First came the concrete slab, 30 by 40 feet, 6 inches thick, steel reinforced. Cost a few $100. Then the metal building itself. Engineered steel trusses, galvanized metal, 2 large sliding doors. Cost $2,400. Electrical work, lighting, ventilation, $200. Total cost $3,800. That was real money in 1968. Dale's entire gross farm income that year was maybe $18,000. He was spending 20% of his annual income on a building to house equipment. The story spread through the farming community like wildfire. Dale Verrer and his foolish equipment shed. But Dale didn't care about gossip. When the shed was finished in late August 1968, he parked his 1963 Farmall 806 inside. Every night after field work, he drove it in. Every morning, he drove it out. When he wasn't using it, the tractor lived inside. His neighbors kept parking their tractors outside. That's what everyone did. You finished work, You parked the tractor wherever was convenient, and you went inside for dinner. The tractor stayed outside, weathering every storm, baking in every summer sun, freezing in every winter cold. Dale's tractor lived inside, protected, maintained, cared for, and that's when the real story began. 5 years passed. By summer 1973, the differences were becoming visible. Dale's 1963 Farmall 806 looked almost new. The paint was still bright red, International Harvester's distinctive shade. No significant fading. No rust on the hood or fenders. The rubber components weren't cracked from sun exposure. The hydraulic hoses were still pliable, not brittle. The engine ran perfectly. Total maintenance cost over 5 years. Maybe $800. The tractor looked and performed like it was 2 years old, not 10. Ed Thompson's 1964 John Deere 4020, which he'd bought brand new for $8,200 and parked outside every single day since, looked rough. The distinctive green had faded to a pale, washed-out color. Surface rust was visible everywhere. The seat was cracked and sun-damaged. The rubber steering wheel had permanent cracks. Ed had spent $1,800 on repairs in those 5 years, mostly fixing things that had degraded from weather exposure rather than mechanical wear. Jim Carson's tractor told a similar story. Bob Mitchell's was even worse. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the mockery started to shift. By 1976, 8 years after Dale built his shed, the differences were stark and undeniable. Dale's 806 still looked and ran like a tractor half its age. Ed's 4020 was worn out, ready for replacement. Jim's tractor was rusting badly. Bob's had been through so many repairs, he admitted it would have been cheaper to buy new. All three Mockin neighbors bought new tractors between 1976 and 1978, convinced they had no choice. Ed bought a brand new John Deere 4440 in 1976 for $28,000, financed at 2% over 7 years. His payment, $429 per month. Jim bought a new International in 1977 for $24,500, payment, $376 per month. Bob bought a new case in 1978 for $32,000, payment, $487 per month. All three were making substantial equipment payments, committed to 7 years of debt service. The irony? They'd mocked Dale for spending $3,800 on a shed, but they'd just committed to paying $28,000 to $32,000 for new tractors to replace equipment that had worn out prematurely from lack of protection. Dale kept farming with his 1963 Farmall 806 parked in his shed every night. By 1978, the tractor was 15 years old with 6 of 800 hours on it. Still running strong, still looked respectable. Dale had maybe $2,400 total invested in maintenance over 15 years. But then everything changed. 1980 arrived like a freight train nobody saw coming. Interest rates spiked to combat inflation. The Federal Reserve pushed the prime rate to 5% by mid-1981. A grain embargo devastated exports. Corn prices collapsed from $3.20 to $2.10. Land values that had climbed relentlessly through the 70s suddenly reversed, falling 40, 50, 60%. The farm crisis hit like a hammer. Farmers with heavy debt loads, especially equipment debt, were immediately squeezed. Their payments hadn't changed, but their income had been cut in half. The math stopped working. Ed Thompson, with his $429 monthly tractor payment, plus land payments, plus other debts, was underwater by 1981. He missed his first payment in November, tried to catch up, couldn't. By spring 1982, he was 4 months behind. The bank started foreclosure proceedings in June. Ed lost his farm in October 1982. The auction was on a cold Tuesday morning. Dale attended, not to buy, just to pay respects. He watched Ed's tractor, the one Ed bought just 6 years earlier for $28,000, sell for $9,200. Ed had paid maybe $18,000 on it so far. It brought $9,200 at auction. The bank took that money, applied it to Ed's debt, and Ed still owed them. Ed and his wife Betty moved to Sioux City. Ed got a job at the IBP meatpacking plant. Betty worked at Walmart. They never farmed again. Jim Carson held on longer, made it until spring 1984 before the bank foreclosed. His tractor, bought in 1977 for $24,500, sold at auction for $17,800. Bob Mitchell lasted until 1986. His case brought $11,200 at auction, less than half what he'd paid. All three neighbors who'd mocked Dale's shed in 1968 lost their farms in the crisis. All three sold equipment at auction for pennies on the dollar. All three moved to town, took factory jobs or retail jobs, left farming forever. Dale Verrer kept farming. His 1963 Farmall 806 kept running. By 1985, the tractor was 22 years old with over 9,000 hours, and it still performed reliably. The paint was faded, yes, some rust showing through, but mechanically the tractor was sound. Total investment over 22 years, including the original purchase, maybe $8,500. His neighbors had spent $28,000 to $32,000 on new tractors, made payments for years, and lost everything. Dale had spent $8,500 over 22 years and still owned his equipment free and clear. The shed had cost $3,800 in 1968. In 1985, Dale calculated what it had saved him. If he'd replaced his tractor every 8 years like his neighbors, he would have spent $55,000 to $60,000 by then. Instead, he'd spent $8,500. The shed had saved him at least $50,000, probably more. But the story doesn't end there, not even close. 1993. 30 years after Dale bought the tractor, the 1963 Farmall 806 was still running, still being used, still parked in that shed every night. The paint was badly faded, rust visible in places, but the engine ran. The transmission shifted. The hydraulics functioned. Dale had used that tractor for 11,400 hours over 30 years. Total cost over 30 years, $11,000. That's $365 per year average. His neighbors, who'd bought new every 7 to 10 years, they'd spent $80,000 to $100,000 or more on tractors over the same 30 years. Dale had spent $11,000. The shed they'd mocked in 1968, had been the difference. In 1998, after 35 years of service, Dale finally retired the 1963 Farmall 806. He was retiring himself at age 69. The old tractor got parked in the back corner of the shed, cleaned up, preserved. Dale couldn't bring himself to sell it. Too much history. Dale sold his 240 acres in 1998 for $1,650 per acre, $396,000 total. He'd farmed for 42 years with minimal equipment expenses because he'd taken care of what he had, retired comfortable, debt-free, substantial savings. He lived another 21 years, died in April 2019 at age 90. At Dale's funeral, his son Tom gave part of the eulogy. In 1968, Dad built a machine shed for his tractor. Cost him $3,800. His neighbors laughed at him, said he was being foolish. They said you couldn't make a tractor last 30 years. Tom paused. Dad's tractor lasted 35 years. His neighbors' tractors wore out in 8 to 10 years. Dad spent $11,000 total over 30 years. His neighbors spent probably $100,000 or more. He looked out at the packed church. More importantly, when the farm crisis hit in the early 80s, Dad survived because he didn't have equipment debt. His neighbors, the ones who'd laughed at the shed, they lost their farms. All three of them lost everything because they had payments they couldn't make on equipment that had worn out prematurely. After the funeral, people drove out to Dale's old farm to see the shed. The 1963 Farmall 806 was still there, preserved, a monument to longevity. One old farmer who'd known Dale for 50 years stood looking at it and shook his head. We laughed at him in '68, thought he was wasting money. Turns out he was the smartest one of us. That tractor lasted longer than some farming careers. But here's the final twist. The story didn't end with Dale's death. In 2003, a younger farmer named Marcus Peterson came to visit Dale. Marcus was 32, farming 480 acres, drowning in equipment costs. He'd heard stories about Dale's tractor and wanted to understand how. They drove out to the old farm, stood in the shed looking at the 40-year-old tractor. Marcus walked around it, examining everything. "I don't understand," Marcus said. "My tractors look worse than this after 5 years. This thing is 40 years old and still looks serviceable." "It lived inside," Dale said simply. "Every night. Every time I wasn't using it, it was in here, dry, protected." Marcus looked at the shed. "But the cost. Built it in 1968 for $3,800. Haven't spent a dime on it since, except roof maintenance. It'll probably outlast both of us." Marcus did the math in his head. He'd bought his case new in 1998 for $78,000 financed. His payment was $1,447 per month, and in just 5 years his tractor already showed significant wear from being parked outside. "My neighbors in '68 laughed at me for building this shed," Dale said. "They parked their tractors outside, replaced them every 8 to 10 years, spent $80,000 to $100,000 on equipment. I spent $11,000 on one tractor over 35 years. "What happened to those neighbors?" Marcus asked. "Lost their farms in the '80s crisis, all three. They had payments they couldn't make. I didn't have payments. I survived. They didn't." Marcus looked at the old shed, at the old tractor, at the simple wisdom of protection and maintenance. "I'm going to build a shed," he said. Dale smiled. "Good. Your neighbors will probably laugh at you." "Let them," Marcus said. Marcus Peterson built a machine shed that fall, 40 by 60 feet, cost $12,800. His neighbors thought he was foolish. 10 years later, in 2013, Marcus's 1998 case was still running, still looking decent. His neighbors had already replaced theirs, some twice. Marcus had saved approximately $45,000 by making his equipment last longer. The 2008 financial crisis hit agriculture hard. Farmers with heavy debt struggled. Farmers like Marcus, who'd kept equipment costs down by building a shed, survived more easily. At Dale's funeral reception in 2019, a group of younger farmers gathered around Tom, asking questions about the shed, about Dale's philosophy, about how to make equipment last. One young farmer, couldn't have been more than 30, said, "I'm paying $2,100 a month on equipment. Tractor, combine, planter. I'm drowning. There's nothing left over." "How much of that equipment is parked outside?" Tom asked. "All of it. Don't have a shed." Tom shook his head. "That dealer is selling you a cycle of perpetual debt. Trade every 5 to 7 years means you're always making payments, always owing, never getting ahead. My dad's tractor lasted 35 years because he protected it." Another farmer spoke up, older, maybe 55. "I was one of the guys who laughed at your dad when he built that shed in '68. I was 22, knew everything, thought Dale was an old fool. I'm 60 now, and I finally understand. I wasted hundreds of thousands on equipment over the decades. Dale spent a fraction of that. I wish I'd listened. I wish I'd built the damn shed. I'd be retired now. Instead, I'll probably die farming, still owing someone." The room went quiet. Vernon Schmidt, 92 years old, one of the few from Dale's generation still alive, spoke up. "You want to know what made Dale different? It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't hard work. It was time preference. Dale was willing to invest today for returns tomorrow. Spend $3,800 on a shed today to save $60,000 over 30 years. Most farmers wanted returns today, wanted to look successful now, even if it meant death tomorrow. Dale chose being successful over looking successful. 6 months after Dale's funeral, 5 farmers in Plymouth County built equipment sheds. Within 2 years, 12 more. In 2024, 56 years after Dale built his shed, a documentary filmmaker came to Plymouth County to do a story about sustainable farming. Someone mentioned Dale Verrer's tractor. The segment aired in October 2024. "This tractor is 61 years old," the filmmaker said to the camera, standing next to the old Farmall 806. "It was purchased, used in 1963, farmed continuously until 1998, and still runs today. The farmer who bought it built this shed in 1968 specifically to protect his equipment. His neighbors mocked him for it. Those neighbors lost their farms in the 1980s crisis, buried in equipment debt. Dale retired wealthy." The documentary went viral. Within weeks, it had been viewed over 200,000 times. Comments flooded in from farmers across the Midwest. One from Nebraska: "My grandfather built a machine shed in 1971. Everyone said he was wasting money. His 1969 John Deere lasted until 2004, 35 years. The lesson is simple: protect your investment." Another from South Dakota: "I built a shed in 2015. Cost me $48,000. My neighbors said I was crazy. 6 years later, my equipment looks new. Theirs looks like scrap." The documentary started a shed building movement. Companies that built agricultural metal buildings reported a 30% increase in orders in 2025. At a farming conference in Sioux City in March 2025, Jim Paulson, the current owner of Dale's farm, spoke to an audience of 300 farmers. The single smartest investment Dale Verrer made wasn't buying a good tractor. It was building a 3,800-ton shed to protect that tractor. That shed multiplied the return on his equipment investment by 3 or 4 times. It was the difference between farming for 42 years, debt-free, and losing the farm like his neighbors did. A young farmer in the audience raised his hand. "I'm just starting out. I've got $150,000 in equipment loans already. Everyone says that's normal, but hearing this story makes me think I'm doing it wrong. How do I get off this treadmill?" Jim's answer was blunt. "You probably can't, not quickly, but you can stop making it worse. Build a shed, protect what you have, make it last. Stop trading equipment every 5 to 7 years like dealers want you to. Run your equipment 15, 20, 25 years. That's how you break the cycle." Another farmer asked, "But equipment wears out. You can't really make a tractor last 25 years, can you?" Jim smiled. "Dale's lasted 35. Mine's at 31 and counting. Yes, you can make it last. The dealers don't want you to know this, but equipment is built to last decades if you take care of it. They profit from you replacing it constantly. Break that cycle and you break their business model." Dale Verrer's shed, built in 1968 for $3,800 while neighbors mocked him, became one of the most influential structures in Plymouth County agricultural history. Not because it was grand or innovative or complicated. Because it was simple, functional, and based on wisdom everyone used to know but had forgotten. Protect your investments and they last longer. The neighbors who mocked it in 1968 lost their farms by 1986. Dale farmed until 1998 and retired wealthy. The shed still stands in 2025, still functional, still protecting equipment, still teaching the lesson its builder wanted to teach. Take care of what you have, and it'll take care of you. 3 farmers laughed at Dale Verrer in a parking lot in June 1968. They thought spending $3,800 on a shed was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard. They parked their tractors outside and bought new every 8 years like everyone else. Dale's tractor lasted 35 years. Theirs rusted out in 8. Dale retired wealthy after 42 years. They lost everything in the crisis. One $3,800 decision in 1968. One shed. One choice to protect instead of neglect. That choice saved Dale's farm, his retirement, his legacy. That choice cost his neighbors everything. The shed they mocked became legendary. The philosophy they rejected became wisdom passed down through generations. And somewhere in Iowa that shed still stands. That 61-year-old tractor still sits inside. Both monuments to the power of one smart decision made while everyone else was laughing. If this story made you rethink how you protect your investments, whether you're a farmer or not, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the person everyone's laughing at is the only one who sees what's coming.